Hisoka's death pissed him off more than you could ever imagine. Hello and welcome back to Suckwar Central. It's the last day of Pride Month, and today I want to talk about a motif that has been rather prevalent in the Succession War arc, the conflation of the nen fighting and the sexing. Believe it or not, Hisoka is not the only character to play around with this motif in this arc, although he is the one around which most of it is centered. Of course, the reason this is a Pride Month video is twofold. Firstly, because most of these interactions seem to occur between people of the same gender. You know, typical second date activities for us gays. And secondly, because it's about a kink, and if you've been exposed to the discourse, you know. So, for starters, let us address the Hisoka in the room. Everyone knows about his whole combat sadomasochism thing, but to briefly recap and explore it further, combat is how Hisoka has relationships. He views each fight as a fling, so to speak, and every aspect of it is contextualized to him as parts of a relationship. This is why he doesn't enjoy fighting more than one person at a time, and why he had no interest in fighting the Chimera Ants. But much more interesting to discuss is that this mentality explains why Hisoka was so upset after his fight with Chrollo went sideways. See, that always bothered me. This crash out felt somewhat out of character for Hisoka. I mean, he got to die doing what he loved and agreed to a fight to the death. He had no reason to get all pissy and try to go after all the spiders, especially in such cheap and underhanded ways, sacrificing his usual way of doing things, which is what brings him the most pleasure. So clearly that shows he's trying to get at Chrollo. He's trying to get back at him for a perceived slight. In order to understand why this is, we have to consider things from Hisoka's extra freaky point of view. Chrollo didn't just fight Hisoka straight up. He spent months playing tag with the guy while he set up his perfect plan to defeat him, including borrowing the abilities of Shalnark and Cordopi. Alright, let's turn Hisoka vision on. And what do we see? Chrollo strung Hisoka along for a while, playing with his heart, flirting with him, returning his affections, but not quite, before finally doing the deed with him. Only, when they actually did it, he involved a couple of his friends that Hisoka had no interest in, against Hisoka's wishes. And yes, they didn't directly fight, but Hisoka was interested in a one-on-one. Shalnark and Cordopi willingly gave Chrollo their abilities to use against Hisoka, which effectively makes it cooperation, and thus violates the sanctity of the one-on-one that Hisoka was looking for. That's a grave insult to Hisoka, especially after the lengths Hisoka went to, from his point of view, in order to win Chrollo's affections. This is part of the reason Shalnark and Cordopi were the first spiders Hisoka targeted. They're certainly not the only ones he could have jumped. I'm sure he'd have had no trouble ambushing Shizuku or Benolanov, even with their abilities. But it's partly so Chrollo can't repeat his strategy, and partly to send a message. He's saying, screw you, Chrollo, I wanted to get with just you, not your friends. Here's what I think of them. And of course, going on to pledge to kill all the spiders, from Hisoka's point of view, is like getting revenge on your toxic ex by sleeping with all their friends, until Chrollo tries to fight him again, which is basically, you know, from Hisoka's point of view, his toxic ex begging for him to come back. So yeah, from a normal, sane person's point of view, Hisoka is clearly the antagonist in this whole situation. But from the way Hisoka sees relationships, Chrollo is the one who personally hurt him. And that's why Hisoka decided to finally put a ring on it with his faithful and committed boyfriend Illumi. Oh, the juicy drama. Illumi explains to Chrollo that Hisoka has paid him for a murder, and that Hisoka himself is the target. Illumi even describes this as a prenup. Essentially, it's the Hisoka equivalent of putting a ring on it. Instead of an expensive ring, it's an expensive murder commission. And if fighting is Hisoka's version of hooking up, then isn't death just somewhat equivalent to marriage? I mean, it's got the same kind of intended permanence to it. It's a real commitment to that killy love bond, saying that you'll never go that far with anyone else. Also, if you understand things that way, then Hisoka coming back to life after Chrollo kills him is essentially him getting a divorce with Chrollo, which I find really funny. Anyway, what's really eyebrow-raising about all this is that the one who describes it as a prenuptial arrangement is not Hisoka, but Illumi. Illumi also reiterates, we're both quite serious about this, which goes to show that on some level, Hisoka sees the whole thing in the same way as Illumi. They're the same type of person with the same type of kink. And this was my first indication that the phenomena of fighting as an equivalent to romantic entanglements was confined to more than just one murderous clown and one Marilyn Manson.
I write songs and fight and I fuck too.
And then of course we have the example of Morena and Volkson's card game. Make no mistake, although it wasn't a literal fight, it was 100% a battle of wits and also a nen fight and a romantic date on top of all that. The two combatants got to know each other, got all emotional and somewhat flirty about it, and even kissed. Morena, of course, makes this all more apparent with her blushy reactions and overt affection toward Volkson. When Volkson doubts her, she's hurt because they've already kissed, which is supposed to prove that they trust each other or something. And when Volkson tries to cheat the card game, from the way Morena acts, you'd think she cheated on her. All in all, this whole thing is written with very much the same tone and emotional beats one might write for a scene of Volkson being coerced into a romantic date she is not comfortable with, feeling unsafe because Morena's friends are all there, and desperately trying to escape it, which is some seriously messed up stuff. This reading makes even more sense when you consider the larger themes of the Succession War, including how systems of trauma and abuse perpetuate themselves across generations, and how Morena is effectively, from her point of view, replicating what was done to her onto Volkson in a twisted form, which is extremely disturbing and heartbreaking to think about. And that, folks, is what makes the Yuri toxic. Anyway, the examples I've talked about are the major ones, but there's a few other ways this is highlighted. When Camilla and Furikov come into conflict, Furikov is definitely enjoying it just a bit too much, and is implied to be thinking naughty thoughts even the second after Camilla shoots him in the head, and seems really happy about getting to put Camilla into handcuffs, which is often seen as a symbol of taking a first step into the freak pool. I mean, come on, 50 Shades of Grey has handcuffs on the cover, and that's a lot of people's first smut novel, and hopefully their worst one because it sucks. And also, Furikov just got shot in the head like a second ago and he's already being a pervert? Nah, man. If that happens, I mean, being shot by an attractive woman did something to him. And I mean, I can understand that, but still, that's a bit crazy. Anyway, Terra Sandwich is also attracted to women, as seen with this panel of him thinking about Theta, yet he enjoys ripping them apart. Higashi seems to have a lot to say this arc about the interplay between sex and violence. And I do think the implication here is that a lot more people have Hisoka-like tendencies than they'd like to admit. Oh my god, speaking of which, I almost forgot the other big one, Ging and Pariston. I mean, their dialogue is even more overtly flirtatious than most of my other examples, particularly with how they refer to their conflict as playing with each other. I mean, look at this line right here. I think if someone said that to me, I would either swoon or reach for my pepper spray depending on the circumstances. And if I recall correctly, the official translation says, I'll play with you until you beg me to stop, which is even better, I mean more direct. And anyway, honestly, I've got one more example that I didn't mention until now because I'll admit I feel this one might be a bit of a stretch compared to the others, which I will defend more robustly. But once I started paying attention to this motif, I went back through all sorts of fights or clashes in the series to see if I could spot it anywhere else. And well, not all the fights have sexual and romantic undertones, except in the most basic and juvenile ways. Like, I guess you could make jokes about Hulk inserting one of his men into Shikaku or Zakuro tying up Billet, but really, beyond these surface level analogies, I don't see any real evidence for a lot of them. It's clear that while more characters than you'd think have these sorts of mentalities or desires, whether consciously aware of them or not, the majority of the characters aren't like this. But one fight where I did notice some erotic undertones was in the battle between Henry and Padel in chapter 391. I mean, Padel's whole inner monologue is, it's not exactly not safe for work, but it's not exactly safe for work either. He literally just wants to feel the pleasurable sensation of sinking part of himself into the flesh of someone else and like, yes, he's talking about murder, but we agree he's talking about murder in a really bizarre way, right? He's being unusually ecstatic about it. And then again, bam, he gets caught in handcuffs, which have in recent years become a sort of symbol of freakiness. And maybe it's just the translation I read, but Padel even says different strokes for different folks, and like, come on. And then when Henry kills him, look at this dude's face. His last words are literally, oh yeah, he's enjoying this. So yeah, Henry versus Padel is yaoi, happy Pride Month, yada yada. And truly, I can't help but feel this whole scene existed to hammer home this theme of the arc. Like sure, Padel's internal monologue does other important things for the narrative, like establish his relationship to Morena, but the freakiness was not necessary to achieve that effect. So where does all this leave us? Togashi is experimenting with the eroticism of violence and the violence of eroticism, but what does that tell us about the series? Why is he doing this? What is he trying to say with all this? And that, dear viewers, I regret to inform you, at this time, I have no idea about. I mean, I have some ideas, but I don't really think we can say for sure yet. We're just gonna have to see where he takes the story. Maybe Chrollo vs. Hisoka round 2 will give us some answers. Which sucks, because honestly, I hate leaving videos in places like this. All I did was say, hey, pay attention to this weird thing Togashi's doing, without getting to the meat of the whole thing, but that's because honestly, until we get some more chapters, I'm not sure the meat of this thing is going to be accessible to us. It's still in the oven, so to speak. So until Togashi's done cooking us this delicious meal, all we can do is speculate. And I mean, maybe I'll do that in another video. The real reason I made this video now, aside from because I desperately needed one last video that could be in some way tangentially related to Pride Month, is because as new chapters come out, I just want everyone to be aware that this is a thing Togashi has been doing lately. Just be on the lookout for any romantic or flirtatious subtext you might otherwise miss, you know? With that being said, I've been CJ from Suck Wars Central, and here's a line I'll say for the last time this year. I hope you have a wonderful gay.